Something that can be kind of frustrating, being from the old YouTube, in which the biggest political debate ongoing for several years was people who believed that the Earth was 9,000 years old and flat and evolution was a lie, versus new atheists who have always been a little bit cringy, I'm sure, but at least knew what science was. But part of the reason why it's now completely cringy and uncool to be an atheist is because so many atheists are not particularly irreligious anymore. Trump derangement syndrome and radical socialism is generally a pretty religious, anti-scientific, and just lunatic concept. All these people keep screaming about the great big scary demon, which isn't, Satanism or sin, but fascism. And most of these people couldn't define fascism if their life depended on it. Arguably, the opposite of a fascistic society is a free society, right? But freedom itself is a word that is considered a dog whistle of the fascists. Uh, Even having any kind of support for society at all is actually fascistic and sinful, because we're talking about people whose entire ideology is based on deconstructing and, in fact, destroying society. Now, do they have any idea of what kind of society they want to build after they're after they're done tearing society apart? No. The entire point is just to destroy. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say literally all leftists want to do is just destroy the country, because that is actually all they want to do and all they're trying to do. They have no idea how they're going to rebuild it afterwards. The point is not to make anything, it's to burn things down. And you're seeing that play out in reality with no level of metaphor. That's literally factually what they are doing. And that is the intent of what they are doing. They're not protesting anything, they're just trying to destroy, because everything you see out there when you walk outside of your front door is fascism. So here's a guy that I used to subscribe to, and I still watch some of his content, at least when he's talking about evolution and phylogenetics and all that cool shit, which is actually supposedly what he mostly does with his career. But of course, this guy has the religion of Trump derangement syndrome and has always been something of a far leftist, and he is a reactionary in that anything that challenges his worldview is some form of oppression or some form of creeping evil or slippery slope, the same things that he would have been in 2014 saying like, oh, being against gay marriage is just a slippery or slope to, oh, gay people will be like, promoting pedophilia or promoting bestiality or, doing all the things that apparently the religious right were correct in saying they would do. Not as a homogenous group of all gays, but the whole agenda-driven, politicized form of that group has not been satisfied with winning the battle for equality, but has moved on to increasingly more extreme things, moving straight down a very real, slippery slope. So here is what a guy who I normally would have credited as a rational person says about fascism. He posted a sign that is up somewhere in the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. It's not from the 1940s. It's something that apparently was put in the museum in the early 2000s. But it is a sign that says, "The early warning signs of fascism." Every early warning sign here is present in present-day America. This is the picture of the tweet, if it'll fucking light focus on it. And all he accompanied this image with was just the word bingo. And I'm going to refute every last one of the list of early warning signs. Powerful and continuing nationalism. America does not have powerful and continuing nationalism. Almost everything that you see in media, almost every propaganda you see in universities, everything that they're trying to teach kids, is that having a nationalist identity is bad, because having a nationalist identity is white supremacy. Hispanic kids, Asian kids, black kids, whether they were born here or moved here, whether they're immigrants or the children of immigrants or if they've lived here for generations, they're taught to see themselves as apart from America. You're not supposed to consider yourself part of a society or a culture. You are supposed to consider yourself an enemy of it and rally and rail against it. So that's patently false. Disdain for human rights. How many times have you guys seen me say that the reason why I am extremely anti-progressive and why I consider all progressives are evil is because everything they're doing is dedicated towards the erasure of human rights? How many times will we have to talk about censorship or being disarmed or equality laws literally being repealed in California so that the state can openly discriminate against white people? Apparently, that's 2 for 2, in that the Democratic left are fascist, if this list is to believe, and the list is ridiculous in general. And part of the reason why it's ridiculous in general is, first of all, it actually has nothing to do with fascism, really, as the political ideology, which nobody can accurately identify anymore, or the colloquial definition, I never say that word right, the slang definition of fascism, which is just, ooh, big, scary state, which is exactly what Democrats want, is a big, scary, oppressive, autocratic state. So again, it doesn't make any sense, but let's continue. Identification of enemies as a unifying cause. Whiteness, toxic masculinity, cis heteronormativity. These are all buzzwords of the left that identify specific inherent characteristics that have nothing to do with what people think and do, but what they are. The white man is apparently the new Das Juden, folks. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't even matter if you vote for Democrats and march in crowds. And it doesn't matter if you burn down buildings. You can never not be white. You can never not be a man. You can never not be cis or hetero. There's nothing you can do to not be the original sin that you are. Unless you're, black, trans, lesbian. You're always going to have a problem, and somebody's always going to look at you funny for what you are. Democrats, and especially progressives, are extremely racist, sexist, and bigoted. By definition, by design, it is on purpose. So that's 3 for 3 already. Supremacy of the military. The military is actually unpopular in bipartisan shit. Both the left and the right currently are very anti-military intervention. Our military actually doesn't do anything inside the fucking nation right now. Nobody's being quashed by the military. The closest, of course, the thing that is alarming all the Democrats, the closest thing we have is the Department of Homeland Security, which is an internal, not external force. It's not a standing military, but a police law enforcement force whose the reason why they were designed was to combat terrorism. And we currently have widespread progressive terrorism going on as we speak. And the DHS was recently employed because it wasn't just that the progressive terrorists were burning down public property or private property. They were doing that to the tune of almost $1 billion in damage nationally right now, maybe even more so. Just Minneapolis alone tried to apply for federal aid to the tune of $500 million just a couple of weeks ago. But because they started targeting federal buildings, which are national property, a national police force, the DHS, had come in to protect those buildings from terrorists, which is actually literally what they are meant to do. That is what they are actually made to do. So, no, DHS is not the military. They're not glorified. And okay, anyway, rampant sexism. Again, that's the left. Just a couple years ago, we had all these feminists saying to us that real feminism isn't sexist, and that all the feminazis, all the intersectional feminists, all the third wave or fourth wave or fifth wave, as people keep trying to fucking deny responsibility and push it to the next hypothetical wave, that those aren't real feminists, that feminism is about equality. The left is not interested in gender equality at all. They are interested in removing equality of opportunity. They're interested in removing meritocracy that does not recognize sex, but it just recognizes productivity. Productivity is of course, cis, hetero, white, supremacy. Therefore, you actually have to give certain people advantages and penalize certain people in order to produce equity. So, the left is by definition and by direct continuous fucking action sexist, so that is now 5 for 5 that the left is fascist according to this list. Controlled mass media. Do I have to say anything? Controlled mass media. Moving on. Obsession with national security. That might be the only one that they actually have us on. The left, actually, one of the ways they want to destroy this country is by reducing the security of the country. They want to defund and eliminate and abolish the police and leave the streets up into chaotic mobs. And they want to import any and all immigrants from any and all places, no matter whether or not there'll be a net benefit or a net harm to the country. The country doesn't deserve to have its own interests in mind, and the citizens of the country don't deserve to expect to not be negatively affected by immigration or reduced security. So, yeah, I guess compared to the left, the right would be obsessed with national security. Now, how that's exactly a bad thing, I couldn't tell you, because it's not. Religion and government intertwined. Well, seeing as the religion of critical race theory, the religion of Marxism, the religion of progressivism, which believes in original sin and a satanic figure, white supremacy, inherent bias, all these magical things that you couldn't quantify in a scientific study because they don't exist. And every time you ever try to say, well, okay, this is what is racism? Well, it's the outward expression of something. And they say, well, no, there's inherent bias. And even if you say, okay, well, then we'll actually rig the system in benefit of non-white, non-male people, they'll say, no, just even the act of identifying it and trying to change it is white supremacy. Or if you are patronizing and taking it easier on black people, you're showing them that you think they're less than you. So it's a rigged system. It's a catch-22. There's literally nothing you can do to escape white supremacy. In fact, the people who are writing the books on critical race theory say there's actually no cure for whiteness and that the revolution is forever. So, yes, I would say that the religion and government are intertwined in the left. Moving on. Corporate power protected. Corporate power protected. Oh, you mean the corporations that, due to the fact that they are erroneously identified as a platform, but they behave as a publisher? You know, the reason why that we're constantly having to deal with copyright shit and abuse of fair use laws, and the DMCA is just basically ignored and wielded as a cudgel, but never able to be wielded back against corporations, and that the reason why social media continues to suck and everybody's being censored is due to abuse of these laws, and that nobody actually has free speech in the information age because the government has not mandated to treat the internet like we treat phones, like we treat everything else. You're not allowed to just cancel somebody's cell service or to remove somebody's ability to text message because they posted a Pepe the Frog meme, but you can kick them off of every other communication platform in the internet age because the law of this country has actually not been applied to the internet. So the people who are fascistically removing your rights when it comes to that is actually the corporate powers that are being protected by the left. So that's another knock against fascism. Let's go down the list to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 against us, I guess, with obsession with national security, and 7. So it's 7-1 on the list that the left is fascist. Okay. Labor power suppressed. You mean all the people who can't go to work because of COVID-19 shutdowns, or can never go back to work because leftist progressive rioters, have burned down their businesses or completely done a fascistic literal takeover of a six city block radius around a precinct in Seattle, and that's going to happen again because the police have officially stood down, and that's happening pretty often in blue cities? So labor power is oppressed. You're not allowed to go to work. You have to take a government handout, show up at the bread line. That's 8 against the left. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts. This one's hilarious. Folks, you're not allowed to study certain things. You're not allowed to say certain things. Or a faceless college tribunal will bring you up and kick you out, and you don't have the right to face your accusers, which is a central right to this country. It's enshrined in the Bill of Rights that you have the right to face your accusers. But of course, these are not courts of the public. They're courts of intellectual intelligentsia. So you can't study that. You can't post that. You can't say that. You can't express that in any way in our institution, or we will bring up a kangaroo court and kick you out, and we will smear you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then everyone will know across all that fascistically controlled social media that you're a Nazi, and your life is over, and people will show up to your house and threaten your family. That's another one. Obsession with crime and punishment. Cancel culture. I don't have to say anything else. Rampant cronyism and corruption. We went over that pretty much already in the corporate power protected section. These people circumvent the law to advantage each other and to oppress people who don't hold to their religion of progressivism and critical theory. So, rampant cronyism and corruption. You see that everywhere the left is. All they do is lie, and they lie to advantage themselves and enrich themselves and hurt other people. Fraudulent elections. Now, in the responses, that's the last one on the list, so we'll finish with this one. Fraudulent elections. Hilariously, all the responses that mention that part of the list to this tweet say one word: voter suppression. So that's actually 2 words, one term. And voter suppression does not exist in the United States. Voter suppression is a propaganda term to try to avoid the national institution of something called a voter ID law. If you watch my content recently, you've already heard me explain this, so I'll try to be brief. What voter ID laws are is the insistence that you must have a state-recognized ID to vote. Just like you have to have a job, to drive a car, to file taxes, to fly in an airplane, to buy cigarettes or alcohol. You show your ID to do a lot of things, to get a credit card. Okay. So, why would we not have a voter ID law to make sure that we know who you are, where you're voting, and to make sure you only vote once? Because of the little secret fact of every leftist election strategy: bussing people around and getting illegal immigrants to vote and trying to make sure that people who are, maybe dead or haven't lived in the country for a while are somehow voting inside of the country instead of with mail-in ballots. It's basically voter ID laws would prevent widespread election fraud. And yet, every single time anyone brings up a voter ID law, they say it's voter suppression. You don't want black people to vote because, black people don't have IDs. Black people don't have driver's license. Certainly not. You've never ever in your life seen a black person, have a job or drive in a car or fly on a plane. You've never seen a black person do any of this normal shit that literally everybody does. How would they ever be expected to vote? Because, they already don't, drive cars or have jobs or file taxes or fly on airplanes or, do anything that everybody else does. So obviously that's why we can't have voter ID laws, because black people just never would be able to vote because, no black person has an ID. Can you tell that I'm being facetious right now? Can you tell that I'm being extremely fucking sarcastic? It has nothing to do with black people and everything to do with getting illegal immigrants, undocumented illegal immigrants, and fucking voter fraud to be able to vote in multiple places and to try to rig the system. So that is another one, perhaps the strongest one, the one that is absolutely most undeniably an example of left-wing fascism, is their constant attempts to keep votes and elections fraudulent. They only have one thing on this list that they could possibly hold against us, which is an obsession with national security, as if that's a bad thing. Every last one of the rest of these applies specifically to the progressive left, of which Aron is self-identified to be affiliated with. This is a man who's pretty smart, who's a science educator, who spends most of his time teaching evolution and trying to keep creationist religious evangelicons from fucking up the school system in Texas. A noble effort, in my opinion. I'm saying that without a hint of irony or dishonesty. I mean that. And yet, a man who spends most of his time trying to design a website to be able to explain the entire cladistic phylogeny, the fancy word for the tree of life, trying to make a website that's an entire encyclopedia of everything back from like fucking single-celled life forms to current life as exists in this planet. It's a fascinating project. That guy can post something so fucking stupid you would have thought a Karen from California posted it. Because the man may not be a religious extremist as far as being a Christian, but he does have a religion, and he has a pretty extremist interpretation of it, doesn't he? Thanks for watching.